Previously on Bad News.
Climate change is coming. It's real. We're going to kill each other trying to survive.
About half of our emissions come from the agriculture sector.
I will single-handedly bring down agriculture in New Zealand in your name.
Do it for both of us, because I can't be fucked.
Agriculture, our biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions and the only industry not in our emissions trading scheme. What sorcery is this? Given the world is flooding and burning, isn't regulation urgent? Labour tried when they were in power, negotiating with lobbyists in a partnership called He Waka Eke Noa. But after 6 years, the partnership collapsed and nothing had changed. So what took 6 years? I can achieve nothing in just one afternoon. Now that we have our national New Zealand First Act supergroup in power, they've pushed the date of regulation back to 2030, and in the meantime have announced a series of pro-farmer and anti-environmental policies. I'm sorry, but are they not reading the news? Surely given the stakes of global destruction, we should come up with some better ideas than just high-emitting business as usual. So why is our government so scared to stand up to farmers, and who am I meant to be angriest at?
The cow that we have in reserve today, it's such a young cow, it has a huge future ahead of her.
That is a well-balanced udder. Juicy. These babes are desperate to be milked. So if we know that this is urgent and we know that agriculture is 50% of this, why are we having such a hard time doing anything about it? Because I know we've tried. I mean, how do you think that went?
Badly, obviously.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of reasons for that.
Walk me through some of them.
I think that, sure. How long do we have? I think the reason why we struggle so much with agriculture is because it is such a significant part of our economy and our culture. And if you look at every other country in the world, where they are struggling on climate is with their lead industry.
How much of the emissions do you reckon farmers are responsible for?
70%.
Oh, I hate when that happens. It's 50.
Yeah. You were so smug. So smug. Let me give you a little question here.
It's so bad. It's like when you ask how much did I pay for this and somebody guesses under what you paid for, it's like you never have a worse day than that. But how much of the GDP do you reckon they're responsible for?
80?
5%.
Fuck that! Jesus!
So agriculture is quite broad, right? So when you add it all up, it's around 10% of GDP.
Oh, okay. I thought it was lower than that, actually.
Yeah, it depends how you slice and dice it. So if it's just dairy and meat, it's much smaller.
Okay.
But if you include all of agriculture and the manufacturing and processing that goes with it, it's around the 10% mark.
So because when I look at that and I go, okay, so they are 10% of the GDP and then half of our emissions come from that, I look at that and I go, fuck, that feels like a problem.
It is. But whenever there is pressure to kind of introduce taxes or regulation, there's this massive reaction from the farming community. And it works.
Fuck. Do you feel like it's fair to tax farmers on emissions?
Not right now, no. I think
Do you imagine getting to a place where it would be fair to do that?
I really hope that we don't have to. I think we can get our direction of travel in the right direction that we don't have to.
The thing that maybe surprises me a little bit about that is when everyone came around the table at He Waka Eke Noa, the idea was to come out with a regulatory framework that we knew probably would include some sort of tax. And then to hear the hope is that we never have to tax, I guess I question then how sincere were the efforts to engage in that process?
Yeah, I think the process was to work on a pricing mechanism, which we could engage in.
Sorry, if I could just pause you briefly, but the purpose of a pricing mechanism would then be to put a price on it.
But ultimately, the goal here is to reduce emissions, not to have a price if we don't have to.
Oh, totally. I mean, nobody wants to tax anyone for just no reason in particular.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that drove me nuts in the last term was, the emissions trading scheme raises revenue for the government from polluters, right? Which is a good thing because then we can put that money into reducing pollution.
Yeah.
But it only applies to carbon dioxide, right? Energy, transport, because agriculture is not covered. And what the government did was they took something like close to $500 million from that revenue that was coming from the carbon dioxide side of the economy and put it into agricultural kind of piece. So I was like, why would farmers ever want to pay for their emissions if everybody else in the country is paying for the solution to climate change from agricultural emissions?
Oh, yeah, okay. Do you have a relationship with farming as a New Zealander?
Not really.
What about
my
overseas people
grandparents
like-
were Cody gum diggers.
Your what?
My Croatian grandparents were, well, great-great-grandparents were Cody gum diggers.
What's that mean?
Cody gum, you know, digging for...
Yeah, but what do you do with it again?
Dunno. Dunno.
In some ways, climate change is going to be a lot harder on farmers than people in urban environments, isn't it?
Well, that's right, because they're exposed to the elements. It is going to get hotter and drier in some areas, and when it rains, that's going to be torrential. It's high risk to have animals exposed to that, and even plants.
Yeah.
Right? So farmers really need to understand two things. One is that being able to produce what they produce, the way they've produced it for however many decades, is not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's not going to be able to happen. Gee, that was pretty clumsy.
How do I say this? Okay. If we introduced environmental regulation, if we say to the farming industry, okay, you've got to make these changes, what does that look like on the ground if you're a farmer?
I think what it means is those farmers that are not particularly profitable, they're going to fail.
Yeah.
You know, if you think back to the reforms of the 1980s, there were some very sad instances of farmers taking their lives, mainly because they could just see no way forward. So, of course, you should have mechanisms in place to support people through that process, but you can't not do things because there might be disruption.
Yeah.
The whole point of trying to price emissions is we want to create disruption.
Do you think that it's a fair ask of the agriculture industry that some of them will have to die off in the changes?
Well, that's the nature of capitalism. You know, it's that competitiveness, and some win, there's winners and there's losers. In the climate battle, we're all the losers.
Yeah.
So I would say that let's minimise the losses. Let's not make it a game where there's too many losers. We've all got to survive on this world in some way.
It's weirdly like they're an industry beneficiary. Like we go like to the ends of the earth to protect farming. And that's what I can't understand, because every other industry, it's like, okay, here's what you have to do to be in the business here. And then if you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen.
It's capitalism until it's a cultural, talisman of like New Zealand of like, what we're all about.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. I don't know why it is that we treat farmers so differently. I guess that's why I was wondering if you had any sort of insight on that. But I don't want to put that kind of pressure on you to have insight.
Well, I just think New Zealand is obsessed with farming. I do like Country Calendar though.
Same.
I love
I
Country
do love
Calendar.
Country Calendar
Yeah.
also.
Yeah.
Is Fonterra a profitable company?
We're a profitable cooperative.
Do you need to make that much money?
Everybody runs a business to generate a return on a strong return on capital.
But if there is a consequence to the way in which we're making that money, and the consequence I'm talking about here now is emissions, global warming, eventual destruction, death and doom. Should profit not only be one of our considerations in how we move forward? Because one of the simplest things that Fonterra could do, presumably, to reduce emissions would be to lower the intensity of cattle and lower the intensity of the dairy farming.
And the risk in doing that is,
profit.
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think, we're already amongst the world's sort of lowest sort of carbon emissions producers of dairy.
Yeah.
And I think your risk in doing that is you're not actually providing the market with a lower intensity product. And what are the consequential impacts that you have for farming businesses and rural communities and the New Zealand economy as a whole?
That is a consequence. That's definitively a consequence. So I'm asking, are we prepared to face into those tough consequences, or are we trying to have it both ways?
I think right now the opportunity is we can find a more profitable farming system with lower emissions without us being in the situation whereby you necessarily needs to reduce the herd.
Because in my mind, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, the thing that makes farming such a big emitter is the size of the herd, meaning it's more methane, it's more fertiliser on the ground, it's more processing. Am I wrong?
No, you're right.
Okay, well, let's just produce less dairy. And I've heard the arguments about, if we produce less dairy, then somebody overseas is going to be producing it less efficiently than us. But, we actually can't control that. So let's just concentrate on what we can control, cut the bullshit and cut some cows.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a dramatic, response. I mean, if we can get there without needing to sort of, dramatically sort of look for those, postures, that's a good outcome for Fonterra, for our farmers, and for the country.
Let's just have less cows.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah.
Let them live out their little lives, bring them to an end, and then bang, in a few years, I've halved our emissions.
Yeah, and also our national income. So then the question is, okay, what could replace that at the same or a higher level of value? Right?
Okay, so what does that mean?
What can we do with that patch of land?
Right, I see.
Right? I mean, you look at, there are some farms that are making more money now off putting solar panels on their land than they are from sheep farming, right?
Yeah, right.
So
one of the alternatives that's been looked at now that farmers are very good at producing is grass. That's going from grass to pasture protein. You have to change the pasture species. The international market for that is estimated to be around 50 billion.
Sure.
20.
Well, let's just do that.
Let's just do that.
I mean, you can still be in the milk business, right?
Yeah.
But you can make milk out of anything these days, like oats, soy, coconuts, you name it, and you still be in the milk business.
Yeah, if you're desperate to be in the milk business.
If that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Without having cows that are, belching out methane.
Yeah.
And causing chaos.
People talk about how meat consumption's actually not nearly as bad as dairy consumption.
Exactly, yeah.
But everyone's like, but I love cheese.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually.
Yeah, dairy is way more responsible for emissions in New Zealand.
Because you're keeping cows alive and to
because of the intensity of it, about how many cows you have to have on the land in order to get enough milk from them and shit in order to...
Well, that's great. I didn't know that, and someone... keep that in because someone will watch this. Hey, Alice, someone might watch this.
Fuck, that's good. That's worth it.
let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
A few years ago, there was a proposal to build a massive irrigation dam up around the Hawke's Bay.
Yeah.
Something like 75% of the water that dam was going to provide went to something like 6 dairy farms.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them are in a part of the Hawke's Bay which is basically gravel.
Yeah.
Right? It's about the worst place to put a dairy farm that you can imagine.
Yeah.
Those dairy farmers, they're making about $6,000 revenue per hectare.
Okay.
Right? Now, up the road, you've got apple orchards that are making $70,000 per hectare, right?
Shit.
Over 11 times as much revenue. Now, they're higher cost, right?
Yeah.
But they're making a ton more money on apples on essentially the same kind of soils that these dairy farmers were. So the councillors were saying to these dairy farmers, why don't you go into apples?
Yeah.
Right? You make a ton more money.
Yeah.
And they said, because we're dairy farmers.
That makes me sad and mad.
There's potentially this portrayal that farmers are rolling in cash and that there's all this money out there. Absolutely not. They're on the, currently at the moment, they're on the bones of their knees. We've got 50% of our dairy farmers predicted to not make a profit this year. Significant amount more of sheep and beef farmers not making a profit yet this year. It's extremely tough on farm.
Yeah. So if 50% of farms won't turn a profit and times are so tough for them, why keep doing it?
Yeah, we're tied to the land. You can't come in and out just like that. That's not how farming works.
But emotionally or financially?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's your understanding about why it's so important to dairy farmers to be dairy farmers?
It's the same in a lot of parts of the country, in a lot of industries. My dad was a dairy farmer, his dad was a dairy farmer,
Yeah.
But here's this thing. I think that we need to deal with that sympathetically. It's exactly the same as what we face on the West Coast with the coal miners there.
Yeah, right.
When we say to them, we don't want your coal anymore, what they hear is we don't want you anymore. That creates resistance. And that means politically, it is incredibly difficult for us to make any progress. That's why it's not just a simple thing of going, well, let's just do something different.
Yeah, I'm not
trust me, I want to.
Yeah, I know. And I'm not even I'm not being facetious when I ask this, but when I look at the gender split of farming, it's overwhelmingly men.
Yeah.
What you're talking about here, about the psychology of this, it feels to me like ego, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it feels to me like, I don't want to be a dick, but like a male thing.
How am I going to comment on that?
Well, I guess I have a frustration of going like, am I going to let the world burn to save some guy's pride? There is a burning asteroid coming towards the Earth and your crying isn't making it easier.
Yeah, I get it. I completely get it.
I guess there's no place for that anger because it doesn't seem to have solved anything. But then also I go, have we been angry enough? Are you guys worried about the end of the world? You cheated! You cheated! If I want to blame someone, who should I blame? You're trying to put me off my game. Shit. And none of you have that, existential dread that we're all going to die? No. He hated me. Oh, really? I feel like I'm being friendly, but am I actually not coming across that way?
It is a bad vibe.
Is it?
Yeah.
Do you think it's too bad a vibe?
I worry that it's too bad a vibe.
Watch out for the shit.
One of the things that really irritates the farming community is that they're seen as the problem.
Yeah, by me.
That their cows and their sheep produce all of this gas.
Yeah.
But they're just doing what they've been trained to do.
I know.
For generations.
Yeah.
Right? And if we start talking about alternatives, why aren't you producing peas or oats and turning it into oat milk? Farmers will say, well, we've been growing arable crops for decades. We know how to grow it. But it's not going to happen unless there is the infrastructure and the scaffolding that needs to go in place. And that's an investment decision. If you look at kiwi fruit and forestry, those are supply chains and market channels that evolved out of partnership with the government over time and huge investment into infrastructure.
Yeah, right.
Right? Farmers are actually quite good at diversifying. If there is a solid alternative that's put in front of them, I think the majority don't see any options put in front of them.
If you've just arrived, no mai haramai, ki te aroha, AMP show 126, sponsored by Property Brokers.
Are you going
to... One more you can guess the jolly. The lollies in the jar. You can buy cookies, you can buy hot dogs, you can buy drinks. And they sell juices. Nice, so come and see.
We can see that the ways that we're going to get around it are not going to be by central government coming in to impose something, only because the lobbying is so powerful and our politicians are so spineless. So the reality...
You said that so neutrally, but it's such a damning statement on our society.
But it is true. If you look at what happened in the last term of government under Labour, they came with a big plan about how we're going to price emissions in the farming sector. And they failed miserably.
Yeah.
And we know that the right side of the political spectrum is extremely aligned to farming interests. And they're not going to do anything. They're going to, all the usual tactics of polluters. Delay, deny, delay, deny, delay, deny. But I think some change is coming.
Yeah.
And the change is coming not because our governments are getting their act together. The change is coming from our biggest consumers, the Nestle's and the Mars and the Tesco's. They're saying, well, if you're going to sell to us, you're going to have to reduce emissions. And in many ways, I think our farmers are so focused on the regulation that's happening onshore. They're not prepared for this tide that's taking place elsewhere, that their customers are going to force them to do this. And it's better actually for us to have a unified level playing field for all farmers in New Zealand, rather than these random standards from random customers coming from the outside.
What about this? You press a button and it cures the climate crisis.
Yes.
But it kills me.
Yeah.
Really?
Sorry.
Right now, would you do it?
Yeah.
You have to make the decision today.
How many times do I have to say yes before you accept it?
Fuck. And then coal.
Yep.
You're giving up on it?
We are.
Okay, by when?
2037.
And when did you find out it was bad?